Hi, everybody. I'm Vladimir Jutia. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. Check out these feeds behind me. These are feeds coming into the CBS News Broadcast Center from all of our stations and affiliates across the country. If it's happening out there, we're bringing it to you live right here. Let's begin. With just 8 days until Election Day, new CBS News polling shows the race for the White House is in a dead heat. We will bring you the latest on both campaigns. Donald Trump has promised mass deportations if elected president again. Later this hour, we dig into a 60 Minutes report on what his plan might actually look like and who it would impact. And a new push from Egypt for a ceasefire in the Middle East, what Cairo is proposing, and who the CIA director is meeting with today. This is CBS News 24/7. In case you didn't know, now you know. There are just 8 days until Election Day, and the presidential candidates are making their final bids to voters. Both Vice President Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are stumping in swing states as the race for the White House comes down to the wire. Harris heads back to Michigan while Trump makes another stop in Georgia today. His Georgia visit tonight follows a controversial New York rally last night. Listen.
We're going to fire Kamala, and we are going to save America. We will cut your taxes, end inflation, slash your prices, raise your wages, and bring thousands and thousands of factories back to America.
CBS News political director Finn Gomez joins us now to talk about this. Finn, let's begin with this argument, this closing argument for Donald Trump. And I love all the headlines that I'm reading this morning. They all sort of sound like what that soundbite we just played, which is Trump talking about a specific policy proposal. But really, it's almost like saying, hey, people who rode the Titanic decided to go for a swim. In other words, the message that seemed to be resonating with people and the message that we heard from some of those speakers in front of that crowd at Madison Square Garden, we heard racism, we heard misogyny, we heard dangerous rhetoric that the Republicans have accused Democrats of using. Is that the final pitch that Donald Trump is making?
Yeah, Vlad, good morning. Yeah, I was at that rally last night in Madison Square Garden, and it was, it was jam-packed. It was full of people, thousands of people. There was thousands outside. But inside, the message was clear. It was a lot of inflammatory rhetoric, like you said, racist jokes made by comedians and others. The campaign is telling us that their last push before Election Day, we're 8 days out from Election Day, Vlad, is going to be focused on immigration. As we know, he's called for mass deportations. Last night, Vlad, he said that it was more important than inflation. It was a bigger issue. He talked about his austere and hardline policies that he would implement, again, focused on mass deportation. It has showed, if you look at the polling data, this is a top issue for many voters in this cycle. But it was muddled also by just this array of attention to some of these these racist comments that were made during the rally. And I think that if you're trying to appeal and if you're trying to expand your target electorate to voters of color, there could be some backlash there. We did see some voters of color in the crowd last night, and so we would still want to see in this battle of just this tight race, like how that will be impacted, how that will impact and how that will be felt in some of these communities of color in these battleground states, Vlad.
Let's play a little bit of what we heard last night from those folks who spoke on behalf of the former president. Let's play that.
I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
And Finn, that, as you know, wasn't just the only thing that those supporters heard. They heard comments from that comedian, black people carving watermelons. And you know this better than I do, Finn. Puerto Ricans, once they establish residency in any of the 50 states in this country, they are able to vote, as you know. And those votes can swing an election. How is the former president's campaign reacting to what we heard yesterday? I also should note note that folks like Bad Bunny, who has some 20 million, maybe more, followers on his social media accounts, Ricky Martin, they are putting out comments to their followers. I think Ricky Martin's was, "This is how they think of us." So how is the Trump campaign responding to the reaction, and what is the vice president's campaign saying about what was heard last night?
Right, this comedian, Tony Hinchcliffe, came out a couple of hours before Trump spoke and before he even arrived, but it almost overshadowed and upstaged the former president's remarks because of his racist comments and jokes that came out. And like the campaign is saying that they did not see the jokes ahead of time, that his comments do not align with what the former president believes. Look, specifically, and when you have Bad Bunny weighing in and essentially endorsing Vice President Harris, like Bad Bunny is huge. He's not just huge with Latino voters. This reggaeton megastar is huge across the globe, right? I mean, he's got a massive following, and he has so far refrained from entering politics by doing this. And looking at Pennsylvania, let's look at Pennsylvania, Vlad. There are about 600,000 eligible Latino voters in the battleground state of Pennsylvania. As we've seen, there have been like these polling numbers that show that it is just like a dead heat there. So when I spoke to the Harris campaign last night, they told me that this could be an advantage, that it would help them appeal to this crucial voting bloc, Vlad. And again, when you need a couple thousand votes here, a couple thousand votes there, if Latinos come out and in response to that and support Harris, it could make the difference in this state and in the election, Vlad.
Yeah, indeed. And it's a good point about Bad Bunny, Finn. Somebody told me yesterday, look, I have friends who don't speak Spanish. In other words, they are not Latino, and they love Bad Bunny's music, and they love him. So you're right. He didn't specifically address it. He reposted a post from Kamala Harris's campaign, and that is going to resonate for sure. Finn Gomez for us this morning from our bureau in D.C. Finny, as always, we appreciate you, brother. Thank you.
Thanks, Vlad.
All right. Vice President Kamala Harris is back in Michigan today, and she's making her final pitch to voters in that very crucial swing state. CBS Evening News anchor and managing editor Norah O'Donnell sat down with the vice president to talk about some key voter issues. And the vice president took a firm stance on abortion rights, Project 2025, and the conflicts in the Middle East.
What is your message to Iran?
Well, first of all, do not respond. It would be a mistake. And we are prepared to defend Israel as we have before. We will again. But the critical point is that there must be a de-escalation in the region.
CBS News campaign reporter Nidia Cavazos is following the Harris campaign, and she joins us now from Detroit. So, Nidia, as you know, the former president criticized Kamala Harris. He criticized the Biden administration and how, so far, they've handled tensions in the Middle East. I know that she has been struggling with voters who care deeply about the issues in the Middle East, specifically those who are Muslim. How has she been fighting back those criticisms?
Well, this is a very complicated issue by nature, and Harris has been facing backlash not only, of course, by Trump and his campaign, but among several voters in key crucial states like Michigan, among the Muslim population, for example. And so Harris has had to walk very fine lines here. She's argued that she is for ending the war. She wants to bring the hostages home. She's calling for a two-state solution after the war ends, but she is also, defending the right for Israel to defend itself. So this is a complicated issue for her, and she's been adamant about saying she wants a two-state solution here. But in fact, protesters never fail to show up to her campaign rallies across different battleground states, and she always lets them, voice their opinion, and she says this is why we fight for a democracy.
Nidia, she is set to make a final pitch to the American people from Washington, D.C., which, of course, is not a swing state. What is the rationale and the reasoning behind making this pitch before Election Day from the seat of our nation's capital?
So Harris has made it clear that while Washington, D.C. is not a battleground state, her message here is that she's going to be having the White House as a background. And her message lately on the campaign trail has been that America has two choices. Voters have two choices here and who they want to imagine and picture seeing in the Oval Office when January comes around. She says we can have a president who wants to run as a dictator, given that the people around him have also been raising flags, or they can have her who is working for the American people. So that's her intent intent behind giving her speech in Washington, D.C., despite the fact that she could very much have chosen any other battleground state that's going to be clear and critical for her victory.
All right, Nidia Cavazos, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Of course, you can watch Election Night with the CBS News team live from our election headquarters in New York City. And with our team spread out across the country, join us for real-time results, analysis, and exclusive polling. Coverage starts at 4 p.m. Eastern on CBS News 24/7 and 7 p.m. Eastern on CBS. All right, to another election now. Georgia's president has called for protests after claiming that country fell victim to a, quote, Russian special operation aimed at moving it off a path towards Europe. The comments follow disputed parliamentary elections over the weekend that saw the ruling Georgian Dream Party win out over the pro-European opposition. The country's president said she did not recognize the results of the vote, and the U.S. and the EU have called for an investigation into reports of voting violations. Turning now to the war in the Middle East, where Israeli forces say they've captured around 100 suspected Hamas militants during a raid on a hospital in northern Gaza. This comes as the death toll in the enclave has now surpassed 43,000. That's according to the Hamas-run health ministry. And as the fighting continues, Iran is weighing on how it might respond to Israel's long-awaited retaliatory strikes over the weekend, which hit Iranian military targets. CBS News foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio has more from Tel Aviv.
Israel and Iran now appear to be posturing but holding back on any more military action. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian says that his government will respond to Saturday's airstrikes with wisdom. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the IDF's attacks early Saturday had achieved its goals. The IDF had described them as targeted and precise, that hit Iranian surface-to-air missile systems and missile production sites. Yesterday, Netanyahu addressed victims of the October 7th attacks and said, "Whoever hurts us, we hurt him." And that was a reference to the fact that these were retaliatory strikes, a response to Iran attacking Israel back on October 1st with nearly 200 ballistic missiles. So far, Iran's response has been muted. Iran's supreme leader called Israel's attack a miscalculation. If Iran does not strike back, this could be the end of this round of fighting. But a national security expert on Iran, who we spoke to, said that truly avoiding a bigger regional war rests on ending Israel's operations against Hezbollah in Lebanon and its conflict with Hamas in Gaza. The enclave's health ministry said that IDF strikes killed more than 80 people over the weekend and more than 800 people in the past 3 weeks in the north. And that is where Israeli troops raided one of the last functioning hospitals. They also struck school-turned-shelter for the second time in a week. The IDF maintains, though, that Hamas uses civilian infrastructure to hide fighters and their weapons. Now, efforts to work towards a ceasefire deal are happening again. CIA Director Bill Burns is in Doha now trying to restart those talks. Egypt has proposed a 2-day ceasefire and the release of 4 Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners. Vlad.
All right, Ramy Inocencio for us in Tel Aviv. Thank you, Ramy. The National Hurricane Center is warning about a potential system developing in the tropics later this week. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the first look at the national forecast. Grant, what are you seeing?
Hey. Here we are, Vlad. Look, we're heading toward the end of hurricane season, but hurricane season runs through the month of November. And typically this time of year, we really have to look in kind of the corners of the tropics for the potential development in those places where the water, those sea surface temperatures are still relatively warm. Some of the warmest water in the world right now is still in the southwestern Caribbean. This is the area where we could see a broad area of low pressure develop. That's looking more likely. But the question at this point is, does that broad area of low pressure kind of organize and become a tropical system that would then be a potential threat to some land masses? Right now, there's about a 40% chance that it becomes a tropical depression or a tropical storm. Models real uncertain on where this would track, but it could track to the north up towards Hispaniola and even farther north from there. The United States right now, not immediately threatened by this, but we'll have to watch this very closely because of that uncertainty in the forecast models. If it does become a tropical storm, the next name on the list is Patty. We're still tracking the tropics, but also tracking a developing strong Pacific storm system that is going to gather strength over the next 12 to 24 hours. And this system is going to bring a ton of snowfall to portions of the Rocky Mountains. We'll talk more about this later, Vlad, because this could be one of the biggest snowstorms that we've seen so far. I guess it's not winter technically yet, but it's going to bring a whole lot of snow to some places. We'll talk about that in just a little while. Back to you for now.
All right, looking forward to that conversation. Grant Gilmore, thank you very much. All right, multiple major publications are facing backlash after not endorsing either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris for president. How it's impacting subscriptions after the break. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. We're following a developing story in Minneapolis where police have arrested a man they say shot his neighbor. CBS News Minnesota reporter Pauline Lee has more on why the situation has been going on for days.
Hey everyone, Pauline Lee here with CBS News Minnesota. It's been hours since the standoff ended, and yet there's still a police presence outside of this home here on Grand Avenue in Minneapolis. As you can see here, police say the man inside, John Sawchek, was actually holed up in this house for several days, and officers had been here waiting for him to come out. He just never did. So overnight they stepped up their efforts, and our cameras were here and caught the moment that he came out and peacefully surrendered. This happened just before 1:30 this morning. Now, dozens of officers were here, including the SWAT team, drones, crisis negotiators. Minneapolis police say this was a delicate situation. They had tried dozens of phone numbers, dozens of emails trying to reach him, and at one point they even sent a phone into the home this morning and tried to talk to him, just didn't have any luck though. They've been in contact with Sawchek's family, a psychiatrist as well. They learned that he has mental health issues, he's a hoarder, there's potentially guns inside the home, and Sawchek had knowledge of explosives. Now this of course all came after we first brought you the story of Sawchek's neighbor, Davis Mattori. He filed at least 19 reports to police before surveillance video caught Mattori getting shot in the back of the neck, allegedly by Sawchek, from inside his home last Wednesday. So we pressed the chief about why it took so long for an arrest to come this morning. Here's what he had to say.
There was extensive work by our officers to try and make contact, to try and bring this person into custody, and we were unsuccessful. And so in that sense, yes, we failed this victim. He should not have been shot. But I will say this, we had no reason to suspect that he would shoot the neighbor from inside the house.
Now, police say Sawchek had at least 3 active warrants out for his arrest. He's facing a number of charges, including second-degree attempted murder, along with stalking and harassment for this latest case here. Now, this all stems from a tree. In fact, if I step out of the way here, you can see the remnants of the tree here. It's essentially a stump. This was the same tree that you saw Mattori cutting down in that surveillance video before he was shot. Now, Minneapolis police say this tree, Sawchek had planted it with his mother, so obviously he had some attachment to it. And last week when we first talked to Mattori, he had said that when he first moved in, he went over to Sawchek to talk to him about, hey, I'm thinking about cutting down this tree, and that's when all of the threats have started. Still a lot of questions to be answered. We'll continue to follow this story. We'll bring updates as soon as we learn more. We'll send it back to you.
All right, Pauline, thanks so much. A crisis this morning among legacy media when it comes to covering presidential elections. The Washington Post announcement that it will not endorse a candidate this year or in any future races has reportedly led to thousands of canceled subscriptions and even some resignations. It is the first such decision for the paper in 36 years, but its publishers claim it is, quote, tradition. CBS News correspondent Kelly O'Grady is here in Studio 55 and joins me now. First of all, welcome to CBS News. It's good to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you because you have a business background,
Yes.
much similar to myself. And so we're going to be able to dig into these really sort of meaty business discussions like this one. Oftentimes people react emotionally to situations like this one. I saw a really interesting tweet from a reporter at the Washington Post saying, look, the decision that the Post made is the owner's decision, not the reporter's decision. By canceling your subscriptions, you're not hurting Jeff Bezos, you're hurting the reporters who need the subscriptions to be able to do the reporting that people count on. So explain what this means for Bezos writ large if people are canceling subscriptions or they say they don't want to shop at Amazon anymore.
Yeah, so I mean, the Amazon point I think is is the more salient one. You know, I think here, if you have someone cancel subscriptions, you know, this for Bezos is not the meat of where he's making his money, right? This is sort of more of a passion project. But if you start to see folks, you know, express their frustration about a product that they thought had a certain brand, that they expected a certain message from, and they say, look, I'm not going to go shop at Amazon. I'm not going to go pay for a ride on Blue Origin. Not many of us can. That's his space endeavor. You might start to see more of that pressure. I will say, Vlad, this is something that we've seen from a lot of businesses over the past 5 to 10 years. You've seen people take more of a step into that realm with political and social issues, whether they feel empowered or pressured to do so. Right. And you do see consumers saying, hey, that's not why I come to you.
Again, it doesn't really affect them, right, Kelly? You have people like Elon Musk who's out there campaigning for the president. A lot of billionaires. Mark Cuban is campaigning for Kamala Harris. These business interests that they have are so diversified. And we were having a conversation earlier this morning at CBS Mornings in our other studio, and we were sort of talking about the fact that even if you are a billionaire like Elon Musk or you're somebody like Jeff Bezos, owning certain properties, Twitter or X or the Washington Post, isn't really seen as something that's going to generate income for you or make you any money. It's a prestige thing or it's a passion project.
That's right. Though what I will say is when Elon Musk took the step into that world, he said, you know, I'm going to make this the virtual town square. You did see the stock price of one of his other companies, Tesla, go down. And so, look, I mean, Tesla's doing fine. They're crushing it. But you do see that investor concern, that consumer concern. And I will note, Reed Hastings, who's the co-founder of Netflix, also got into this area where he went and he gave $7 million to VP Kamala Harris's campaign. And then all of a sudden, people started canceling their Netflix subscription. They said, this is not why I come to this. But there is always that distinction of a business leader versus the business. But from the consumer perspective, they're kind of saying, well, look, this is the same thing.
So the other point that you made to me earlier this morning, which I hadn't thought of, was that there can be, I mean, I know that someone will say, look, if you cancel your subscription to the Washington Post, you're hurting the reporters. It's not going to hurt Jeff Bezos. But sometimes these things do hurt. You pointed out in the case of Bud Light, for example, where people took to social media to express displeasure about something.
That's right. You know, you have, you know, in that case, Bud Light, right? They had the ad where it was, some thought it was controversial. They worked with a trans influencer, and people stopped buying the product. They stopped, you know, going to the store, drinking Bud Light. They said, no, I'm going to go with Corona instead. And you saw the stock price of Anheuser-Busch come down. You know, in this case, I will say, to be fair, you know, they're saying, look, this is a return to our roots. We're not going to do this. And so we do have to, you know, mention that as well. But when you're a consumer and you see something like this happen and you vote with your wallet, and I will leave you with this, Vlad, Michael Jordan said, hey, Republicans buy sneakers too, and that's why he never endorsed anyone. Yeah, and it's a good point. I do think, though, that there will be something interesting that people will take note of as we are 8 days out from this election, which is this anticipatory bowing down to pressure that some CEOs are taking, and they may never come to bear. Let's say Donald Trump loses this election. It will all be for naught. On the other hand, I do wonder when you try to make a deal like that in anticipation of a potential presidency, in this case Donald Trump's, we know that Donald Trump is not necessarily the most loyal person in the world. So it really just becomes, if you say one thing that angers him, he decides, I don't care what you did before the election, I only care about the here and the now. It's a very transactional relationship, you know? Really fascinating. It's great to have you. Great to be here, Vlad.
Thanks for coming by. Appreciate it. All right, let's keep talking about former President Trump. He's promising the largest deportation program in American history if reelected. What we're learning about his potential plan and who it could impact. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of the big stories we're following. Opening statements are expected later this week in the trial of Daniel Penny in New York City. As you may recall, Penny pleaded not guilty to manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide in connection with the 2023 chokehold death of Jordan Neely in a New York City subway car. Jury selection began last week and continues today. McDonald's says Quarter Pounders will be back on the menu this week at hundreds of affected restaurants after an E. coli outbreak. The company says testing ruled out beef patties as the source of the outbreak that sickened at least 75 people in 13 states. One person in Colorado has died. McDonald's says the FDA believes slivered onions from a single supplier are the culprit. Quarter Pounders will be sold at the affected restaurants without the onions. And Delta is suing cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike over a global tech outage that led to the cancellations of thousands of flights in July. The airline says the issue cost the company more than $500 million in lost revenue and expenses. Delta says the outage happened because CrowdStrike did not test its update before sending it out to several million Microsoft users. All right, let's get back to our top story. There are just 8 days until Election Day, and Vice President Harris and Donald Trump are back in some critical swing states in a final sprint to gain more supporters. New CBS News polling shows the race is in a dead heat, both nationally and collectively in battleground states. CBS News' senior White House correspondent, Weijia Jiang, has more on the race as it ramps up, and she joins me from the White House. Weijia, it's good to see you. So, as you know, there's a week left until a week and a day until Election Day. Let's just talk a little bit about how both sides are framing the conversation going into this last couple of days.
Vlad, it's always great to see you. Hello to everybody. So it's no surprise that with just over a week left until Election Day, both of the candidates are really framing this race as a referendum against the other one, with the former president, Donald Trump, claiming that the Biden-Harris administration and its policies have really been detrimental to Americans. So he is asking people to remember what it was like when he was president. He is also really reaching out to his base, using heightened rhetoric, as we saw, as you covered all this morning during his latest rally, to really, describe some of those Americans in shocking ways. And then on the other side, Vice President Harris, she's really trying to get people to remember, frankly, what Donald Trump was like. And she says, when someone shows you who they are, to believe them. So the Harris campaign claims that when Trump says he wants to have mass deportations, when he says he wants to rule like a dictator, when he says he wants to have militaries like Hitler, that he means it. And, we have been talking to voters, Vlad, to see how their messages have been landing. Take a listen.
And I think under Trump's policies, just in his first 4 years, we saw incomes go up for the middle class family, and the quality of life to go up, not down. And in the last 4 years, I guess you're seeing inflation and a lot of middle class families suffering to keep up with bills and childcare.
I think his only interest is his self-interest.
Exactly.
He's not interested in helping the people who are going to vote for him because they're just misinformed. He's going to make the rich people richer and make sure he feels good about himself.
And as you just mentioned, Vlad, this race is so tight, not only nationally, but in those key battleground states where it's really going to matter, which is why from this point on, you should expect to see a lot of both candidates in all of those states, Vlad.
So let me ask you about President Biden, Weijia, who, as you know, is casting his ballot today. Early voting was crucial for Democrats back in 2020. Back in 2020, as you know, because you were still covering the White House back then, the former president seemed to rail against early voting. He thought it was some plot to rig the election. I mean, in his mind, everything is a plot to rig the election, unless it's in his favor. But now, in 2024, does it appear to you that Republicans have the edge in this early voting? Because it does seem that Donald Trump has now gotten behind it.
Well, what we do know is that millions and millions of people have decided to vote early. And to your point, Vlad, the former president's message is a little muddled now, even though he has encouraged people to do it. He has also said that, he's not positive that all the early voting and mail-in ballots would be legitimate. And so he's keeping open the door to air grievances down the road if he sees fit. But to your point, when I talk to Republican Party officials, they have been urging people in all of their states to vote early if possible, to get it out of the way, to make sure they do it so they don't forget to do it. And that was exactly the message from Vice President Harris yesterday when she campaigned in Philadelphia. In fact, on stage right behind her, there was a massive sign that read, "Philly votes early." And she directly pleaded with people to find out how to do that by ballot, by mail-in ballot, to find out where they could drop those off. And so, yes, this is a really important tool for both parties, Vlad. And as we have seen already, record number of people, they seem to be listening.
Indeed. Weijia Jiang for us at the White House. Always great to have you, Weijia. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, the largest deportation program in American history. That's a quote, and it's a promise from former President Trump, and he repeated it last night at his rally in New York City's Madison Square Garden. Our colleagues at 60 Minutes asked Trump's former acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement what that would actually look like. Listen.
Stephen Miller said that this will involve large-scale raids.
I don't use the term raids, but you're probably talking about worksite enforcement operations, which this administration pretty much stopped.
Workplace enforcement, that's a roundup.
And that's going to be necessary.
So you are carrying out a targeted enforcement operation. Grandma's in the house. She's undocumented. she get arrested too?
It depends.
Which?
Let the judge decide.
CBS immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez was a producer on that story, and he joins me now from Tempe, Arizona. So, Camilo, we heard the former acting ICE director talking about the so-called targeted enforcements versus the idea of rounding people up en masse. What's he trying to explain there, given that the way that the former president is talking, he's not talking about targeting, he's talking about rounding people up en masse?
That's right, Vlad. Homan here is describing a massive change in policy. Under current Biden administration rules, ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is largely only arresting and deporting immigrants who are deemed to pose a threat to national security or public safety because they have committed serious crimes, as well as recent border entrants, people who are just crossing the U.S.-Mexico border illegally in recent months. Long-standing unauthorized immigrants who are here illegally but who have not committed any crimes, Vlad, are largely not being targeted right now for deportation. But Homan, who Trump has said will join him in the White House if he is elected this November, would have it change dramatically. He would have ICE agents go after anyone who is here illegally. He says, and he told us, that he would target public safety threats and national security threats first, but that ICE should not be prevented from arresting anyone who is here illegally, including that grandma that Cecilia mentioned who is in the country illegally but has otherwise not committed any other crimes. He says that a judge should decide the cases of those immigrants, and that if a judge orders those immigrants deported, Vlad, ICE should be able, rather, to carry out that deportation. But ICE, under this administration, would argue, Vlad, that it has limited law enforcement resources and that those resources should be only focused on serious public safety and national security threats. Homan also, importantly, Vlad, said that he would also reinstate mass worksite immigration arrests, which the Biden administration discontinued in 2021.
The other thing that he has said, Camilo, the former president, is that he would invoke the Aliens and Seditions Act of 1798. And maybe our viewers are not that familiar with that act, but that was put into place to do exactly what the former president is suggesting now. And it also was deemed to have an effect on the First Amendment, in that the government was able to use the Alien and Seditions Act of 1798 to suppress any dissent to the government's policies. At that time, it was engaged in sort of a smallish type war with the nation of France. Can you just talk about, and the Supreme Court, although it never ruled on it because that happened before judicial review in the 1800s, there are legal scholars who say the Alien and Seditions Act today would be deemed unconstitutional. But the president is talking about reinstating it.
That's right, Vlad. And he is saying that he will invoke this 18th century law, basically, or 17th century law, to go after suspected gang members who are in the country illegally, using this law from 1798, the Alien and Sedition Act, to basically remove the legal barriers that the government faces in deporting many immigrants, because under current law, Vlad, many of these immigrants, including those who are here illegally, have to be afforded due process and have the right to request asylum. This law would eliminate that provision and would allow the government to summarily deport immigrants. But as you know, there are still a lot of legal questions about whether or not this could actually be enacted.
Camilo Montoya Galvez, who knows more about immigration issues than anybody at CBS News, and who also worked to produce that 60 Minutes report yesterday with Cecilia Vega, reporting for us this morning from Tempe, Arizona. Camilo, thank you, my friend. Appreciate it. All right, let's take you now to Philadelphia. We told you about the racist and inflammatory remarks made at the Trump rally in New York City last night. Well, some leaders in Philadelphia, Republican Americans, or people of Puerto Rican descent, I should say not Republican, people of Puerto Rican descent, are speaking out. This after a comedian called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. Let's watch.
At a Donald Trump rally yesterday in New York, a top campaign surrogate made jokes degrading Puerto Ricans and our island. The Trump surrogate called our beloved Puerto Rican island garbage in the middle of the ocean. If there's one thing I've learned from my community, is that we will not be silenced in the face of injustice, especially not here in Philadelphia, the second city with the largest Puerto Rican population in the United States. Trump wants to act like he doesn't hate Puerto Ricans, but his record says otherwise. The truth is that those insults are in line with the trajectory of insults to Puerto Ricans by Donald Trump himself. Like when he threw paper towels at Puerto Ricans who were already hurting from being displaced by Hurricane Maria. Or when he seriously said he wanted to trade Puerto Rico to the Dutch Greenland. Let's be clear, a second Trump term is a risk we cannot afford. Look no further than his Extreme Project 2025 agenda that would make life more expensive for hardworking families. Here in Pennsylvania.
All right, and the point being made here by leaders of Puerto Rican descent in Philadelphia is that Philadelphia has the second largest number of Puerto Rican folks of Puerto Rican descent in the city, and so Pennsylvania is a swing state. If you win Pennsylvania, you win the whole thing. So that is why we wanted to share a little bit of what local leaders in Pennsylvania are saying this morning about the language that was used at the former president's rally in Madison Square Garden last night, where at one point a comedian who opened the event called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. As a reminder, you can watch Election Night with the CBS News team live from our election headquarters in New York and with our team spread out across the country. Coverage starts at 4 p.m. Eastern on CBS News 24/7 and 7 p.m. Eastern on CBS. Here in New York City, as November is just around the corner, let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with another look at the national forecast. Grant.
Vlad, starting to feel a little bit more like fall here in the Northeast. Right here in Philadelphia, many places drop down to near or below freezing. And I know up in the Northeast, up towards even New York, Boston, really starting to feel that cooler air across the region as well. Let's talk temperatures here, at least across most of the country today. High temperatures. Nice, right? Look at these temperatures across the central U.S. there in the upper 70s to lower 80s. Up towards New York today, temperatures near 60 degrees this afternoon. While we're talking about building warmth across the eastern half of the United States, we're talking about a building winter storm back into the Rocky Mountains. Have a look here. The blue indicating a winter weather advisory. It looks like we're having some technical issues, so Vlad will send things back to you. We'll try to talk more about this building winter storm in just a bit.
All right, Grant Gilmore, we were just looking, Grant, at some of your images there, and I couldn't tell that there was something wrong, but clearly the studio was glitching, so we're going to take it back from you. We'll check back in with you a little bit later. A Hollywood actor will be sentenced today for his role in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Coming up, a look at how he could spend a couple of years behind bars. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Any moment now, former Hollywood actor accused in the January 6 riots will be sentenced in Washington. Jay Johnson, who appeared in shows like Bob's Burgers and Arrested Development, allegedly shoved police who were protecting the Capitol that day with a stolen shield. He faces 18 months and felony charges and is requesting leniency in part due to his star status. You ever heard of it? Okay. Federal trial attorney and legal analyst Robin Nunn is joining us now from Washington to talk more about this. Robin, help me understand this request for leniency. I just looked around the studio. I got blank faces from guys who work in media. No one seems to know who this dude is. He believes the government is making an example of him, and since he's a star, he shouldn't be sentenced, or he should be sentenced leniently, with some lenience.
Yeah, that is exactly what is before us. There was a pretty lengthy briefing filed by his attorney in which the government responded. And his sort of position is that he is facing these 18 months because of his celebrity status. And that is the only reason why they're going after him. The charges he faces are obviously interference with law enforcement, disorderly conduct. He took a shield and held it up and, kind of proceeded to allow attackers to go into the Capitol grounds. But he is now arguing that he should receive leniency because he has obviously pled guilty and is seeking the mercy of the court.
One of the crew, Robin, just said, Jay Johnson, the only Jay Johnson I know is the former Secretary of Homeland Security. So he's not, and clearly not him. So he's not the only big case we're waiting on in Washington today. There's a hearing about the release of the audio of Special Counsel Robert Hur's interview with President Biden. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think that the Biden-Hur audio release situation is pretty compelling. This is a constitutional argument. It really goes to the meat of executive privilege versus congressional oversight. Obviously, as we know, Biden has agreed to release a transcript between him and Special Counsel Hur's interview, but he has invoked executive privilege to withhold the actual audio recording. So executive privilege is obviously a primary legal shield for holding sensitive communications, but congressional oversight is really broad. They have investigatory powers that are unlimited. So they filed a complaint in DC, and they're really seeking to push whether executive privilege can protect this information from their arms.
Well, the Supreme Court has had a number of rulings recently around the issue of executive privilege that have a lot more to do than with just audio tapes being released to the public. And I understand the point of transparency, Robin, but some of the things that the Supreme Court has ruled on have to do with really significant issues that could affect the American people, including if the president decides to order an assassination attempt, really significant issues. So I wonder, is this just for transparency reasons, or is this politics again at play?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure why, if you have the transcript, you would need the audio recording. I think the court is going to basically take a look and see whether they should do what they typically do, which is defer to executive privilege. But I think Congress is really trying to make a particularized showing here that there's a need that outweighs that privilege. I think that's going to be a tough case. It's really going to hinge on the necessity of having that audio version versus the adequacy of the transcript.
All right, Robin Nunn breaking it down for us this morning. Thank you, Robin. All right, the Miami Heat unveiled a statue honoring Hall of Fame point guard Dwayne Wade. That is Dwayne Wade. We're going to show you what the statue looks like after the break. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. This morning, critics are saying the Miami Heat dropped the ball. Get it? Drop the ball. What? Okay. All right. On a statue. They dropped the ball on a statue honoring Basketball Hall of Famer Dwayne Wade. This statue, check it out, was unveiled outside the team's arena yesterday. Wade called the honor crazy, but some comments on social media claim the statue looks nothing like Wade. I think he's about to make an offer for us to enter the Matrix, because it looks like Lawrence Fish. That's Dwayne Wade. Okay, but folks, this isn't the first time this happened. Back in 2017, a bust of soccer star Cristiano Ronaldo was also criticized for missing the mark. I would say that probably now looks more like Ronaldo than Dwayne Wade. That looks like you need to take a red pill or a blue pill. He is the one. I want to bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the last look at the national forecast. Grant, what'd you think?
Yeah, it doesn't look like him, I don't think. Right. Maybe the eyes. I think the eyes look pretty good. I think the rest of it, it's kind of tough. All right, hey, talking about a big snowstorm system headed into the Rocky Mountains. This is going to drop a lot of rain or snow between now and Wednesday afternoon. Some places could pick up close to 2 feet of snow. Meanwhile, very warm conditions across the Plain States, mild, pleasant conditions over the east, and then cooler weather moving into California and the desert southwest. Vlad, at least he gets a statue, right? That's the most
That
important.
is true, Grant. At least he gets a statue. I can't complain about that. But it's sort of like, makes me think of that photo of Jesus that was messed up by that painter way back when. Grant Gilmore, thank you very much, brother. Does it for me. Stay right where you are after the break. Elizabeth Cook is live from San Francisco. This is CBS News 24/7.